All right, we're live. All right, I'm going to share my screen. This is messed up. All right. Is this working?
Hello, my name is Jay Kodal.
Can you guys see it? Can you guys?
Yes, we can see
it. Okay, cool.
know that American Samoans are not actually considered citizens. In fact, they're nationals. This means that they do not have the same rights and protections that other U.S. citizens have. This made me come to the resolution that Congress should amend the Immigration Act, making it easier for people living in U.S. territories to gain citizenship. This would mean granting them greater political rights and representation. This includes, among other things, federal voting rights. I'm defining citizen as a legally recognized subject of a state. I'm defining subject as a person living in a land where they are coerced or expected to live by certain laws set by a governing body. I'm defining full U.S. citizen as someone who is legally represented in Congress and is allowed to participate in federal elections. And I'm defining U.S. territories as the islands of Puerto Rico, Guam, or American Samoa, or any other place which is subject to the rule of the United States Congress without receiving representation in that Congress. My first argument is that American Samoans should be considered citizens of the United States. The 14th Amendment guarantees citizenship to all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. Basically, what this means is that if you are born in a United States territory, you should have the full rights of the citizenship. But American Samoans are not being given these rights because of the place of their birth. This is a problem because American Samoa is under the jurisdiction of the United States Congress, yet they have no representation in that Congress. They are subject to American rule and our laws, yet they have no say in it. According to Columbia Electronic Encyclopedia in March of 2021, the inhabitants are considered American nationals, not citizens, and do not vote in U.S. elections, but they do send one non-voting delegate to the U.S. Congress. Now, the way to solve this is by making American Samoans citizens. We know that full U.S. citizenship is the right solution and not the kind of citizenship that we have in Puerto Rico. We know this because Puerto Rico and other U.S. territories have inferior protection, rights, and representation as compared to full U.S. citizens. Puerto Rico has been a U.S. territory since 1898, and Puerto Ricans have been U.S. citizens since 1917. This is because the Jones Act of 1917 made all people born in Puerto Rico U.S. citizens. However, it did not expand their political rights, according to Race and Empire State, written in 2019. This is important to change because it is an act of oppression by the American government. Most importantly, there is no good legal or economic reason to deny American Samoan citizenship. According to a book called Some More for Samoa in 2014, rather than being actively based on institutional racism today, the anomaly of American Samoa's status as the last unincorporated territory without citizenship by birthright appears to have no specific justification. A rule this obscure, perplexing, and technical should require a compelling reason for its existence. My second argument is that there should be an easier path to citizenship. Denying citizenship is a common oppression tactic that always leads to social inequality. This is commonly seen in Mexican American immigrants. According to the Bilingual Review written in the year 2000, immigrants actually help the economy grow. They stated that business gains in the United States result from a low-wage labor force provided by migration from Mexico. The public in the United States, however, resists formalizing the immigration status of Mexican immigrants, who are viewed as racially and culturally different and a threat to their economic well-being. The uncertain legal status of undocumented immigrants renders them all the more susceptible to exploitation in the workplace. Basically said, we need to provide more accessible citizenship status to immigrants in order to protect them from workplace exploitation. It is unnecessarily hard to become a citizen in the United States. The naturalization process for Samoans is especially long and expensive. According to VOA News in 2016, they must live in the U.S. for 3 months before they can apply. Then they must stay in the U.S. for months or even years while their application is being processed. During that time, they may not hold a job that requires U.S. citizenship. Now, the reason why this would work is because it would directly combat the main problem with non-citizenship status, which is working rights. American Samoans living in Utah brought this suit in 2018, arguing that being non-citizen nationals instead of U.S. citizens closed the door to some employment opportunities and didn't allow them to vote, among other rights afforded to U.S. citizens. And that was on CNN in 2019. The impact of allowing American Samoa an easier path to citizenship is a matter of fairness and of human rights. It is unfair to treat them as second-class citizens and still expect them to abide by United States laws. That came from CNN in 2014. American Samoans have fought in our armed centuries for over a century, so it feels fundamentally unfair that they got a short shift when it comes to citizenship. The problem is that fairness cannot overcome the language of the language of the Constitution and the centuries of legal precedent stating that they are not citizens. In conclusion, American Samoan nationals should be given birthright citizenship, along with making the path to legal immigration easier. This will not only help us economically, but it is a matter of fairness and human rights.
All right, it's still going, right? All right, cool. Who wants to go next? Hello? Can everyone hear me?
Hello.
Hi, who wants to go next?
I guess I'll take a crack at it.
I'm sorry, who said that?
This is Jasmine. Sorry for the echo.
It says you need to connect your mic/cam before I can add you.
Yeah, I turned it off. 1 second.
All right.
Okay. Sorry, it's so dark in here. Wait, it says I'm muted. Am I muted? Or can you hear me? Okay. So I wanted to talk about American Samoans today. So Samoa has been a U.S. territory for over 100 years. It became a U.S. territory, I believe, in the 1900s, and they still have not received their U.S. citizenship. And the United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration into the United States. I wanted to define some terms before we go into this. So a citizen is a legally recognized subject. They're either native or naturalized. A national is one or a person or a group, a country that owes allegiance to or is under protection of a nation without regard to the more formal status of citizen or subject. So in this case, Samoa is, they owe allegiance to the United States. And democracy is a system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representation. And I believe that American Samoans should be considered U.S. citizens. I believe there's more net benefits. I believe having that plan to make them U.S. citizens creates more benefits than disadvantages. So one advantage of making them citizens is right now, American Samoans living in the United States They face a lot more job restrictions than me or any other U.S. citizen does. They run into trouble here because they're ineligible for many financial opportunities and job opportunities, which leads to a lot of frustration in American Samoans. So they are not considered American citizens. Many are residents of U.S. territory, so they're living in this country, but they don't feel American because they're not U.S. citizens, unless one of their parents is a citizen. And I think making them citizens would work because we've done it with other countries before, such as the people born in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marinas are all granted birthright citizenship, and it has worked out for them. So it could definitely work out for Samoans as well. And then advantage 2 of making them citizens is democracy. Even though they're nationals, they don't have the same rights as we do, especially in our democracy. It's very important that everyone living here definitely needs to be represented. If they're working here, if they lived here all of their life, they should definitely be have a voice in who they elect to lead them. So, yeah. Yes, that's what I believe we should do. And then just to summarize, if they became U.S. citizens, they would enjoy the same rights as natural-born citizens, such as our freedom of speech, freedom of worship, and religion, whoever they wanted to. They can vote in city, state, and federal elections. They have the right to own property, and they have a right to a fair and impartial trial. And these are all the reasons I believe American Samoans should be considered U.S. citizens.
All right, who wants to go next? That was awesome, Jasmine. Anyone? Can anyone hear me? Guys, can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Who wants to go next?
I'm still working on my A1C sheet, but I can't hear anything on the Zoom call. I can only hear stuff on, not Zoom. I can only hear stuff on Zoom. I can't hear anything on StreamYard.
Okay. Is anyone else ready?
I think somebody put it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Can you guys hear me now? Hello?
Yep.
All right, sweet. So today I'll be talking about American Samoa. So American Samoas, obviously, they don't have the common rights that U.S. citizens do. And even though American Samoa has been a U.S. territory for over 100 years, they still have not received citizenship. The United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration into the United States. So I'll give you guys some terms and define them. So a citizen is a legally recognized subject or national of a state or commonwealth, either native or naturalized. National is one that owes allegiance to or is under the protection of a nation without regard to more federal status or citizenship. Democracy is a system of government by the whole population or of all the eligible members of state, typically through elected representatives. So this becomes a problem for American Samoans because they can't elect anybody. They are natural-born citizens, but yet they don't have a right to vote or the right to participate in our elections or many other benefits that I'll go into that American Samoans have, or that they don't have. So I believe that American Samoans should be considered American citizens, even though there's a lot of problems that they face in their own state. American Samoa has a very small population, and they're very scarce on resources. And since they're such a small population, I think if they are U.S. citizen, they really won't affect us that much. It would just be more of a benefit to them. So I think there's really no harm of making them a natural-born citizen. We see this with Puerto Rico. We see it with Guam. They can still vote, but the population is so small that in those countries that it's really not enough to completely change, our politics. Not saying that's good or bad, but it's not that broad. So I think a harm for them not being, they can't really get a lot of jobs, and there's a lot of job restrictions that the American Samoans have. They can't really work with anything with the federal government. They can't have any government job. There's a lot of them that work in the healthcare industry or in health science and whatnot, but they can't get a job through the county or through the state. And then, yeah, that was it.
Awesome. Anyone else?
I can give it a go.
Can anyone hear me? Scott?
Yeah.
Awesome, dude. Thank you.
Can you hear me on StreamYard? Okay, cool. So American Samoans are not granted citizenship in the United States, even though they are part of the United States Department of Government and things. So they're part represented by the United States, but they're not really given the same kind of representation in the government. So the islands are administered by the U.S. Department of Labor and Manufacturing, and under the Constitution of 1966, as amended, executive authority lies with the governor, who since 1977 has been elected by popular vote. So on the island, the Samoans elect their governor, who governs the cities, and they also elect a couple representatives. The Senate has 18 members who are elected according to the Samoan custom for the local chiefs, and the House has 20 members elected by popular vote, plus one non-voting delegate from the Swains Islands. And these delegates, besides doing government things on their own islands, they are partially represented in American Congress and the Senate, but they're not allowed to vote in American matters. The territory has one non-voting delegate in the U.S. House of Representatives. Residents of the American Samoa are not eligible to vote in U.S. presidential elections. And that was from Bunkin Wagnall's New World Encyclopedia. So if the United States is representing them, and the American Samoans aren't even allowed to determine who will be the president, at least to some degree, that isn't quite accurate, right? So the next thing is that the chiefs on American Samoa are actually concerned about conserving the culture for the island, and they actually they opposed giving Samoans dual citizenship to the United States in fear of losing their culture to outsiders and tourists. So by the early years of the Cold War, some Samoan leaders had petitioned Congress against the extension of citizenship to American Samoa for fear that citizenship would lead to the destruction of Samoan cultural autonomy. So they were trying to make sure that they didn't want to have a large tourist industry. They saw what happened to Hawaii, or what was currently happening to Hawaii, and they didn't want that to happen to them. They wanted to preserve their culture and their small society and their own practices for things. So the leaders of Samoa decided that it would be better off that they did not get dual citizenship for Samoan citizens. And that'll be it.
Cool. All right. Who's next?
I'll go.
Nate? Who said that? Sorry.
Yeah.
All right.
Is it started?
Whenever you want.
All right. American Samoa has been part of the United States for over 100 years, and yet the people of American Samoa are still not U.S. citizens. John Fitzsimonu has lived in Utah for over 2 decades, and he is a father, a healthcare worker, and a husband too. And he is a tax-paying resident of Utah, and he still has not been able to vote, even though he was born in a U.S. territory. This is an issue. The United States federal government should implement immigration reform that removes substantial statutory restrictions on legal immigration into the United States. Some key terms in removing these statutory substantial restrictions is citizens, which is a legally recognized subject of a nation or state. National, one that owes allegiance to or is under the protection of a nation without regard or formal citizenship. And democracy, which is a governing system by where the whole population or eligible members of a state are represented and make decisions for the nation. American Samoans should be considered U.S. citizens. The plan creates more benefits than it does disadvantages. The first advantage is citizenship. American Samoan non-citizen nationals experience more job restrictions than actual U.S. citizens, and they're born on U.S. soil. Technically, they should have the same rights and protections that we do. The anomaly of being a U.S. national it's a source of frustration for these American Samoans living in the U.S. mainland, especially. They still pay taxes, and they don't get the same protections that everybody else does. According to the LA Times, there are American Samoans, but many residents of the U.S. territory and archipelago in the South Pacific Ocean don't feel American. That's because they're born on our land, but they don't have the same rights, even if their parents are a citizen. People born within Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and Commonwealth of North Marinas are all granted birthright citizenship. So why is American Samoans different? According to We Are in spring 2017, their status as nationals but not citizens of the United States is comparable to the status of Puerto Ricans prior to the 1917's Jones Act, which did not have any negative repercussions when it was passed. The second advantage of citizenship is democracy. People that are born on U.S. soil and not given rights that others are, that's just not fair. While Congress has recognized citizenship by birth in every other U.S. territory, those born in American Samoa remain stigmatized and injured by the inferior label of non-citizen or U.S. national. Being considered a national and not a citizen can create a negative stigma for Samoans living in the United States. According to Vlaplus, consequently, anyone born within the dominions and under the allegiance of the United States should be a U.S. citizen. It is important to have a representation in democracy. Therefore, we should grant American Samoans the right of citizenship. The impacts and the ability to give these naturalized citizenships will help them with job opportunities and just living a better life. They do pay taxes and they should be equal to us. Thank you.
All right, who hasn't gone? Who knows? Who still hasn't gone? I'm not sure. Does anyone know who still hasn't gone?
I haven't gone yet, but I'm ready whenever.
Mark?
Yeah.
All right, I'll put you on.
All right, so American Samoans are always considered nationals, but they are not fully naturalized citizens of the United States. They are a territory owned by the wait. My mic's having issues. Hold on.
All right, I think this is working. I'll just start over. Hold on. American Samoans are considered nationals but are not fully naturalized citizens. They are a part of the territory owned by the U.S. but don't have the same rights as natural-born citizens. By allowing them to become naturalized, they will have a better opportunity to partake in the American dream. But being part of this dream is one of the driving factors that push all people to immigrate into the United States. Naturalized citizens are people who immigrate into a country and go through the legalization process to become a citizen, and they have one of the highest rates of citizenship going into the U.S. And by going into reasons why Samoans do and do not become citizens, we can figure out why there's such a discrepancy as to why so many do not become citizens. So, in regards to citizenship, the Samoan, they are not considered U.S. citizens in order by the courts and constitution, and they are only a part of the residency of the U.S. territory, but it doesn't make them feel like they're Americans, so that's why a lot of them choose not to become citizens. So with that, they choose to just stay as Samoan nationals. So this goes for the same thing as people who live in Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Guam, Marinas, all the other territories that are owned by the U.S. They're all able to become citizens, but they're not natural born. As per the spring of 2017, their status held as nationals but not citizens of the U.S. And this is comparable to the status of Puerto Ricans who, prior to the congressional recognition of immigration or recognitions of citizenship in Puerto Rico through the 1917 Jones Act. So this problem lies solely on why so many Samoans choose not to become a citizen, because they feel like their way of life will become disrupted and it'll cause them to not want, they feel like it'll make their way of life change far differently when they've grown up and lived all their lives doing and partaking in their traditions. Like, they feel as though that when they become citizens, it could threaten their Samoa, which is their Samoan way of life, which includes many things like their traditional prayer curfews and having communal living areas. And they believe that the island and the land of Samoa should stay within their family, and they treat every citizen and every person born in Samoa as brother, sister, mother, father almost, because of how tightly knit that area and group of people are. But when it came to whether they want citizenship, they looked to Hawaii, because Hawaii was also in a similar situation where they had a bunch of rules and traditions that they were afraid were going to go up in smoke because of becoming naturalized and being able to not necessarily having their own identity as American Samoa, or in the Hawaiians' case as Hawaii. So back in the 1900s, Hawaii was also under the status of national, but soon later, in around the 1950s, they were officially nationalized, and that allowed for people that were born in the U.S., that were born in Hawaii, to be technically part of the U.S. And they talk about how in Samoa, the land ties you back to your family, your name, and where you belong. And they feel like that they don't want this way of feeling and this way of life to go just not happen anymore because of how the national naturalization can change how they live their lives. So why will this plan work? By giving Samoans the ability to become naturalized citizens, they're able to partake in the American dream. So in December 2019, a federal judge in Utah stated that Samoans are U.S. citizens, and they should be issued new passports reflecting that they are official U.S. citizens. But there were American Samoans who lived in Utah at the time who brought this lawsuit up in 2018, and they were arguing that being non-national citizens instead of U.S. citizens, so this caused the door to be closed of equal opportunities for employment and voting rights and other basic rights that citizens have. So them not being able to be a part of the American dream has kept them from becoming full natural citizens. And why should this problem be fixed? By giving American Samoans the ability to become citizens, it would help build better relations with the continental U.S. So in an opinion piece by Danny Ceballos, he states that American Samoans have challenged federal laws and policy that decline to grant citizenship multiple times to the federal district court in the District of Columbia. They've granted the government's granted motion to dismiss the lawsuit multiple times, but the DC Circuit and the appellate court is giving them another chance to argue for this case, and showing that the U.S. territories are the last American frontier, which they don't want to have tainted with the new naturalization laws. And the theory is that if the practice of acquitting territories required endowing the inhabitants with citizenship of the U.S., this would be very, very inconvenient to the government, because they would have to rewrite all these rules and regulations that they've done in the past and try and get them to become different and figure out where they went wrong last time and try to change that. But that could lead to other problems that could create more conflict and more strife and more unnecessary inconveniences towards them. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else?
I can go next.
Was that Peyton?
Yeah.
Okay. So John Fitzmo, who has lived in Utah for over 2 decades, but is still eligible to vote, therefore, or because he was born in American Samoa. John is a husband, a father of 3, and a healthcare worker as a tax-paying the time, and it is John's wish to work for the government. He cannot, though, because of his status. Samoans have been a part of the U.S. territory for over 100 years and have still not received citizenship. I believe the United States federal government should implement a form that removes substantial statutory restrictions on illegal immigration into the United States. Let's start with going over a few terms. A citizen is a legally recognized subject or national of state or commonwealth, either native or naturalized. National means that one owes allegiance to or is under the protection of a nation without regard to the more formal status of citizen or subject. A democracy is a system of government by the whole population on all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. When looking at removing statutory restrictions on illegal immigration, we can state that American Samoans should be considered U.S. citizens. We will be taking a look at some different advantages and plans to create more benefits for the American Samoans, as well as looking at disadvantages. American Samoans are non-citizen nationals who experience more job restrictions than any U.S. citizens. The anomaly of being nationals and not U.S. citizens has been a source of frustration for many American Samoans living on the U.S. mainland, where they have been ineligible for many federal opportunities. American Samoans are also not considered American citizens because they are an archipelago in the U.S. Pacific Ocean. This was stated in the LA Times in 2018. They don't feel American. That's because people born American Samoa are not U.S. citizens unless one of their parents is a citizen originally born in one of the U.S. states. We know this plan will work because people born in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, and the Commonwealth of the Northern Marianas are all granted birthright citizenship. Their status as nationals but not citizens of the United States is comparable to the status of Puerto Ricans prior to the congressional recognition of citizenship in Puerto Rico through 1917 Jones Act. This was stated in spring of 2017, and this act was passed in 1917. Since this act that was passed, the Jones Act worked, it'll work for the American Samoans as well. When taking a look at our democracy, we can see that some people born on U.S. soil are not given rights that others are. While Congress has long recognized citizenship by birth in every other U.S. territory, those born American Samoans remain stigmatized and injured by the inferior label of non-citizen U.S. nationals. Being considered a national and not a citizen can create negative stigma for Samoans living in the United States. Consequently, anyone born within the dominions and under the allegiance of the United States is considered an American by birth. This is a fact stated by Vlahopoulos in 2018. They have a birthright to be a citizen of the United States. It is important that we follow this plan as we need representation for our democracy. Therefore, we should grant American Samoans a right to citizenship. When this plan works, American Samoans will have the ability to become naturalized citizens, and they will be given the opportunity to partake in the American dream. Alvarez stated in 2019 that American Samoans living in Utah with the suit in 2018 sued the suit in 2018, arguing that being non-citizen nationals instead of U.S. citizens closed the doors to some employment opportunities and didn't allow them to vote, among other rights afforded to U.S. citizens. We need to fix this. Overall, if American Samoans were to become citizens, they could enjoy the rights as natural-born citizens, such as a freedom of speech, freedom of worship, vote in city, state, federal elections, and also the right to own property and the right to a fair and impartial trial. When looking at our Constitution, our democracy, and the rights given to our citizens, we can establish that American Samoans should be considered United States citizens as well. Thank you.
Cool. Devin, are you the last one?
Yeah.
All right, you ready?
Yep. On February 14th, 2018. Oh, wait. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Cool. It says I'm muted. That's weird. On February 14th, 2018, the H.R. 5026 bill was introduced in House by current delegate for U.S. House of Representatives from American Samoa, Amua Amata. Once the bill is passed, American Samoa and Swains Island residents will be granted a simplified naturalization process. The H.R. 5026 bill works to amend the Immigration and Nationality Act to waive certain requirements for naturalization for American Samoan U.S. nationals to become citizens. A United States non-citizen national is a native of an American territory, such as American Samoa. Currently, they must become a state resident in order to naturalize. Nationals are entitled to the same legal protection as U.S. citizens. However, they do not have the same political rights of a U.S. citizen. Once the naturalization process is simplified, citizenship will be much more obtainable for American Samoa natives. The first advantage we're going to talk about deals with the benefits of citizenship. U.S. citizens have more political rights and privileges than non-citizen nationals. In the academic journal, Some More for Samoa, the case for citizenship uniformity, Benjamin Morrell states, American Samoans are not citizens of any country, though they still have obligations and some rights under American law. Compared to other Americans and even those living in other territories, Samoans often have fewer rights and more hardships with no apparent rhyme or reason. American Samoan non-citizen nationals do not have the right to vote on political matters and often face more hardships when it comes to job opportunities, property management, traveling internationally, etc. Simplifying the naturalization process will make citizenship more obtainable for American Samoans, which will in turn diminish these unnecessary hardships. The second advantage brings awareness to protracted democracy issues. American Samoans continue receiving unjust treatment due to flaws within the Citizenship Clause of the 14th Amendment. In the book, Democracy's Constitution, Claiming the Privileges of American Citizenship, Verity Smith states, the construal of the Citizenship Clause's jurisdictional element is fundamentally flawed not only because it violates the interpretive rule against redundancy. Virtually every individual present on U.S. soil is in some way subject to the basic level of sovereign authority the United States government exerts over its geographical territory, including individuals whose exclusion from birthright citizenship is uncontested. This quote directly correlates to the status of non-citizen nationals of American Samoa because American Samoa is a territory of the United States. However, the island's natives continue receiving unjust treatment. By passing the H.R. 2056 bill, American Samoans will have a simplified naturalization process, which results in citizenship status and rights for all current non-citizen nationals of American Samoa. Thanks.
Awesome. We're done, guys.